Anna Laetitia Barbauld was a prominent English poet, essayist, literary critic, editor, and children's author, a woman of letters, who published in multiple genres. Barbauld had a successful writing career at a time when female professional writers were rare. She was a noted teacher at the Palgrave Academy and an innovative children's writer. Her primers provided a model for pedagogy for more than a century. Her essays demonstrated that it was possible for a woman to be publicly engaged in politics, and other women authors such as Elizabeth Benger emulated her. Barbauld's literary career spanned numerous periods in British literary history. Her work promoted the values of both the Enlightenment and sensibility, and her poetry was foundational to the development of British Romanticism. Barbauld was also a literary critic, and her anthology of 18th-century British novels helped establish the canon as known today. Barbauld's career as a poet ended abruptly in 1812 with the publication of 1811, which criticized Britain's participation in the Napoleonic Wars. Vicious reviews shocked Barbauld, and she published nothing else during her lifetime. Her reputation was further damaged when many of the Romantic poets she had inspired in the heyday of the French Revolution turned against her in the later, more conservative years. Barbauld was remembered only as a pedantic children's writer during the 19th century, and largely forgotten during the 20th century. But the rise of feminist literary criticism in the 1980s renewed interest in her works and restored her place in literary history. Early life. Barbauld was born on the 20th of June 1743 at Kibworth Harcourt in Leicestershire to Jane and John Aiken. She was named after her maternal grandmother and referred to as Nancy. She was baptized by her mother's brother, John Jennings, in Huntingdonshire 2 weeks after her birth. Barbauld's father was headmaster of the Dissenting Academy in Kibworth Harcourt and minister at a nearby Presbyterian church. She spent her childhood in what Barbauld scholar William McCarthy describes as one of the best houses in Kibworth and in the very middle of the village square. She was much in the public eye, as the house was also a boys' school. The family had a comfortable standard of living. McCarthy suggests they may have ranked with large freeholders, well-to-do tradesmen, and manufacturers. At his death in 1780, Barbauld's father's estate was valued at more than £2,500. Barbauld commented to her husband in 1773 that, "For the early part of my life I conversed little with my own sex. In the village where I was, there was none to converse with." Barbauld was surrounded by boys as a child and adopted the high spirits. Her mother attempted to quash these, which would have been viewed as unseemly in a woman, according to Lucy Aiken's memoir. What resulted was a double portion of bashfulness and maidenly reserve in Barbauld's character. Barbauld was never quite comfortable with her identity as a woman and always believed that she failed to live up to the ideal of womanhood. Much of her writing would center around issues central to women, and her outsider perspective allowed her to question many of the traditional assumptions about femininity during the 18th century. Barbauld demanded that her father teach her the classics, and after much pestering, he did. Thus she had the opportunity to learn Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and many other subjects generally deemed unsuitable for women at the time. Barbauld's penchant for study worried her mother, who expected her to end up a spinster because of her intellectualism. The two were never as close as Barbauld and her father, yet Barbauld's mother was proud of her accomplishments and in later years wrote of her daughter, "I once indeed knew a little girl who was as eager to learn as her instructors could be to teach her, and who at 2 years old could read sentences and little stories in her wise book, roundly, without spelling, and in half a year more could read as well as most women, but I never knew such another, and I believe never shall." Barbauld's brother, John Aiken, described the father as the best parent, the wisest counselor, the most affectionate friend, everything that could command love and veneration. Barbauld's father prompted many such tributes, although Lucy Aiken described him as excessively modest and reserved. Barbauld developed a strong bond with her brother during childhood, standing in as a mother figure to him. They eventually became literary partners. In 1817, Joanna Baillie commented of the relationship, "How few brothers and sisters have been to one another what they have been through so long a course of years." In 1758, the family moved to Warrington Academy in Warrington, where Barbauld's father had been offered a teaching position. It drew many luminaries of the day, such as the natural philosopher and Unitarian theologian Joseph Priestley, and came to be known as the Athens of the North for its stimulating intellectual atmosphere. One other luminary may have been the French revolutionary Jean-Paul Marat. School records suggest he was a French master there in the 1770s. He may also have been a suitor to Barbauld. He allegedly wrote to John Aiken declaring his intention to become an English citizen and to marry her. Archibald Hamilton Rowan also fell in love with Barbauld and described her as possessed of great beauty, distinct traces of which she retained to the latest of her life. Her person was slender, her complexion exquisitely fair with the bloom of perfect health, her features regular and elegant, and her dark blue eyes beamed with the light of wit and fancy. Despite her mother's anxiety, Barbauld received many offers of marriage around this time, all of which she declined. First, literary successes and marriage. In 1773, Barbauld brought out her first book of poems, after her friends had praised them and convinced her to publish. The collection, entitled simply Poems, went through 4 editions in just 1 year and surprised Barbauld by its success. Barbauld became a respected literary figure in England on the reputation of poems alone. The same year she and her brother, John Aiken, jointly published miscellaneous pieces in prose, which was also well received. The essays in it were favourably compared to Samuel Johnson's. In May 1774, despite some misgivings, Barbauld married Rochemont Barbauld, the grandson of a French Huguenot and a former pupil at Warrington. According to Barbauld's niece, Lucy Aiken, her attachment to Mr. Barbauld was the illusion of a romantic fancy, not of a tender heart. Had her true affections been early called forth by a more genial home atmosphere, she would never have allowed herself to be caught by crazy demonstrations of amorous rapture, set off with theatrical French manners, or have conceived of such exaggerated passion as a safe foundation on which to raise the sober structure of domestic happiness. My father ascribed the ill-starred union in great part to the baleful influence of Nouvelle Heloise. Mr. B. impersonating Street Pro was informed by a true friend that he had experienced one attack of insanity, and was urged to break off the engagement on that account. Then, answered she, if I were now to disappoint him, he would certainly go mad. To this there could be no reply, and with a kind of desperate generosity she rushed upon her melancholy destiny. After the wedding, the couple moved to Suffolk, near where Rochemont had been offered a congregation and a school for boys. Barbauld took this time and rewrote some of the Psalms, a common pastime in the 18th century, publishing them as devotional pieces compiled from the Psalms and the Book of Job. Attached to this work is her essay, Thoughts on the Devotional Taste, on Sects and on Establishments, which explains her theory of religious feeling and the problems inherent in the institutionalization of religion. It seems that Barbauld and her husband were concerned that they would never have a child of their own, and in 1775, after only a year of marriage, Barbauld suggested to her brother that they adopt one of his children. "I am sensible it is not a small thing we ask, nor can it be easy for a parent to part with a child. This I would say, from a number, one may more easily be spared, though it makes a very material difference in happiness whether a person has children or no children. It makes, I apprehend, little or none whether he has 3 or 4, 5 or 6, because for a 5er now to exercise all his whole stock of care and affection, we should gain, but you would not lose." Eventually her brother conceded and the couple adopted Charles. It was for him that Barbauld wrote her most famous books, Lessons for Children and Hymns in Prose for Children. Palgrave Academy. Barbauld and her husband spent 11 years teaching at Palgrave Academy in Suffolk. Early on, Barbauld was not only responsible for running her own household but also the school's. She was accountant maid and housekeeper. The school opened with only 8 boys, but when the Barbaulds left in 1785, around 40 were enrolled, a testament to the excellent reputation the school had acquired. The Barbaulds' educational philosophy attracted dissenters as well as Anglicans. Palgrave replaced the strict discipline of traditional schools such as Eton, which often used corporal punishment, with a system of fines and jobations, and even, it seems likely, juvenile trials, that is, trials run by and for the students themselves. Moreover, instead of the traditional classical studies, the school offered a practical curriculum that stressed science and the modern languages. Barbauld herself taught the foundational subjects of reading and religion to the youngest boys, and geography, history, composition and rhetoric, and science to higher grade levels. She was a dedicated teacher, producing a weekly chronicle for the school and writing theatrical pieces for the students to perform. Barbauld had a profound effect on many of her students. One who went on to great success, William Taylor, a preeminent scholar of German literature, referred to Barbauld as the mother of his mind. Political involvement and Hampstead. In September 1785, the Barbaulds left Palgrave for a tour of France. Rochemont's mental health had been deteriorating and he was no longer able to carry out his teaching duties. In 1787, they moved to Hampstead, where Rochemont was asked to serve as the minister at what later became Roslyn Hill Unitarian Chapel. It was here that Barbauld became close friends with Joanna Baillie, the playwright. Although no longer in charge of a school, the Barbaulds did not abandon their commitment to education. They often had 1 or 2 pupils living with them, who had been recommended by personal friends. It was during this time, the heyday of the French Revolution, that Barbauld published her most radical political pieces. From 1787 to 1790, Charles James Fox attempted to convince the House of Commons to pass a law granting dissenters full citizenship rights. When this bill was defeated for the 3rd time, Barbauld wrote one of her most passionate pamphlets, an address to the opposers of the repeal of the Corporation and Test Acts. Readers were shocked to discover that such a well-reasoned argument should come from a woman. In 1791, after William Wilberforce's attempt to outlaw the slave trade failed, Barbauld published her epistle to William Wilberforce Esq. on the rejection of the bill for abolishing the slave trade, which not only lamented the fate of the slaves but also warned of the cultural and social degeneration the British could expect if they did not abandon slavery. In 1792, she continued this theme of national responsibility in an anti-war sermon entitled Sins of Government, Sins of the Nation, which argued that each individual is responsible for the actions of the nation. nation. We are called upon to repent of national sins, because we can help them, and because we ought to help them. Stoke Newington and the end of a literary career. In 1802, the Barbaulds moved to Stoke Newington, where Rochemont took over the pastoral duties of the chapel at Newington Green. Barbauld herself was happy to be nearer her brother, John, because her husband's mind was rapidly failing. Rochemont developed a violent antipathy to his wife, and he was liable to fits of insane fury directed against her. One day at dinner he seized a knife and chased her round the table so that she only saved herself by jumping out of the window. Such scenes repeated themselves, to Barbauld's great sadness and real danger, but she refused to leave him. Rochemont drowned himself in the nearby New River in 1808, and Barbauld was overcome with grief. When Barbauld returned to writing, she produced the radical poem 1811 that depicted England as a ruin. It was reviewed so viciously that Barbauld never published another work within her lifetime, although it is now often viewed by scholars as her greatest poetic achievement. Barbauld died in 1825, a renowned writer, and was buried in the family vault in St. Mary's, Stoke Newington. After Barbauld's death, a marble tablet was erected in the Newington Green Chapel with the following inscription: Legacy. At her death, Barbauld was lauded in the Newcastle magazine as unquestionably the first of our female poets, and one of the most eloquent and powerful of our prose writers, and the Imperial magazine declared, so long as letters shall be cultivated in Britain, or wherever the English language shall be known, so long will the name of this lady be respected. Quote, she was favorably compared to both Joseph Addison and Samuel Johnson, no mean feat for a woman writer in the 18th century, but by 1925 she was remembered only as a moralizing writer for children, if that. It was not until the advent of feminist literary criticism within the Academy in the 1970s and 1980s that Barbauld finally began to be included in literary history. Barbauld's remarkable disappearance from the literary landscape took place for a number of reasons. One of the most important was the disdain heaped upon her by Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth, poets who, in the youthful, radical days had looked to her poetry for inspiration, but in the later, conservative years dismissed her work. Once these poets had become canonized, their opinions held sway. Moreover, the intellectual ferment that Barbauld was an important part of, particularly at the dissenting academies, had, by the end of the 19th century, come to be associated with the Philistine middle class, as Matthew Arnold put it. The reformist 18th century middle class was later held responsible for the excesses and abuses of the industrial age. Finally, the Victorians viewed Barbauld as an icon of sentimental saintliness, and erased her political courage, her tough-mindedness, her talent for humor and irony, a literary figure that modernists despise. As literary studies developed into a discipline at the end of the 19th century, the story of the origins of Romanticism in England emerged along with it. According to this version of literary history, Coleridge and Wordsworth were the dominant poets of the age. This view held sway for almost a century. Even with the advent of feminist criticism in the 1970s, Barbauld still did not receive her due. As Margaret Ezell explains, feminist critics wanted to resurrect a particular kind of woman, one who was angry, one who resisted the gender roles of her time, and one who attempted to create a sisterhood with other women. Barbauld did not easily fit into these categories, and it was not until Romanticism and its canon began to be re-examined through a deep reassessment of feminism itself that a picture emerged of the vibrant voice Barbauld had been. Barbauld's works fell out of print, and no full-length scholarly biography of her was written until William McCarthy's Anna Laetitia Barbauld, Voice of the Enlightenment, in 2009. Her adopted son Charles grew up to be a doctor and chemist. He married a daughter of Gilbert Wakefield. The child, Anna Laetitia Barbauld, wrote literary memoirs, including Memoir of Mrs. Barbauld, including letters and notices of her family and friends in 1874.